Hello, everybody. Welcome to our meetup. We're going to be talking about enterprise MySQL, heavy traffic management, and ultra availability. I'd like to give a special thanks to the Duke concierges who will be doing a raffle after this. Tiffany is in the audience somewhere. She's outside. Okay. Well, she'll be doing a raffle after this so we can win free services from them. And you will hear more about that at the end of Paul's session. This is Paul Berry, CTO of HuffingtonPost. This is Jim Bartus, Lead System Administrator from HuffingtonPost, and they'll be doing this wonderful interview. Wonderful presentation, or an interview. I can interview you. Yeah, sure. This meetup is also sponsored by the IT Management Conference. The IT Management Conference is going to host the world's best IT leaders, including the creator of MySQL, the creator of PHP, the pioneer of Agile Extreme Programming, the CIO of Forbes, and many, many, many other IT leaders. You can all check out the website. It's www.manageit.me. That's manageit.me. It's also was linked in the invite for this meetup. And without further ado, Paul.
Thank you.
Just pass behind you.
So thanks for coming, everybody. And what I was thinking I would take you guys through is sort of the last 2 years of my life as it relates to survival and MySQL. I'm a dirty realist by practice, and I think you'll kind of pick that up on the decisions we've made have been completely survivalist, and I think we have some really wonderful things to reach in our roadmap, but I am also tremendously proud of what we as a team managed to pull off. So just as a feel for it, like how many of you guys are involved in websites? All right. And how many of those are like already doing a lot of traffic? Right. And of those, like how many of you have like SQL crashing on you? Only one honest HuffingtonPost has been a really wild ride. It's a very fun organization to work within. It has a freedom from a lot of legacy issues that our sort of competitors in big media publishing have, and it has a lot of creativity within the organization. Ken Lair, in case you don't fully know what HuffingtonPost is, a quick little thing on my vision of what HuffingtonPost is and how it came to be is 3 people are critical to it, and that's Ariana, who's the visible person and super connected and bringing in Larry David and Queen Noor and high-profile bloggers, etc. And Ken Lair is the chairman, and he has played an incredibly critical role in having an agile organization, and he kind of understands the news. He was really the headline writer in secret for us for a while, working with the edit team. And then Jonah Peretti is the third founder, and he's an MIT Media Lab grad who adds that sort of tech component so that everything they would chase after, he would be able to add as much viral components to it as possible. That's what his whole thing was. I actually met him. He was my professor at ITP at NYU, where he taught contagious media. And my project for there was thedogisland.com, which if you want to check out later, that's one of the best things I'll ever do. So that's HuffingtonPost. And when I started, we had, about 2 years ago, we were at about 3 million UVs as measured in internal. And about 3,000 to 5,000 comments a day. There were 2 guys working in tech, And it was really one guy, Andy Akamai, was the like founding programmer, and all the code was his. It's built on top of movable type, so movable type was there. But highly customized, because he already had so many problems he had to solve that movable type really is a fantastic platform, and I'm so glad we're on it, but we had to customize it. Not everyone has 10,000 bloggers logging in, so there's a lot of things we had to just separate out and fork it and not worry about MT's upgrade path. The other guy when I started was a really fantastic sysadmin who left, but before he left, he gave us one thing that was critical to everything else that would happen, which is a deployable instance. And you have to be a pretty competent Linux, Apache, PHP, or Perl aware developer to be able to take your instructions and set up your instance. But that became a critical thing for us, is that on EC2 we could deploy instances, and then that could be the developer's instance, and they'd have a database associated with it, and if they couldn't figure that out, then they couldn't be a developer for us. And it became a really good, we only got great guys because the other ones just couldn't get to the start. So basically it was hell in the beginning, because Andy had gone through some war stories that make mine look minor. When he first set up HuffingtonPost, everything was on one box, and that includes mail. So mail, tripled up PHP, Apache, and MySQL, everything was one box, because who knew if this crazy little startup was going to work out. We were at Rackspace when I got there, and we're now at Datagram, which I love, and it's a colo concept, and we lease our stuff from Dell, or lately purchased after the investment, but it gives us full control, and that was critical, that there wasn't a reliance in our team on someone at Rackspace doing a configuration change. That type of model, I think, is sort of disastrous if you're really growing. So we had one SQL server, and every day, at least 3 times a day, so HuffingtonPost has one floor that is edit and tech combined. And it's a really great relationship tech and edit have. It's, I think, a little bit unusual for the industry. We eat lunch together, we joke, it's everyone together, it's not an us and them thing. But like 3 times a day, the editors would complain, like, oh, MT is slow, MT is slow. And that was a lot of stress, because my weekends would be a 10 a.m. call, MT is slow, Paul, oh damn, and it was always MySQL. Because I do think the database is the heart and the weakest component in a sense when you're trying to do rapid development. Maybe that's exaggerating, because everything comes together. It is a holistic approach I think you have to take to survive. But that's where we were, and where we are today is I am very happy with my life, which is like, not that I was unhappy 2 years ago, but I was miserable. Trying to keep things alive. We'd have to restart this SQL server, and then we'd have these crazy things. Oh no, we're going to have data corruption, so pull the plug out, the Ethernet cable from the server. And then load would drop from 300 to 5 in the next 20 minutes, and the whole time the website's down and we're getting killed. So now, we started at 3 million UVs and 3,000 to 5,000 comments a day. We're doing as much as 80,000 comments a day now, and we're, by internal numbers, at about 23, 24 million UVs. So the growth has been huge, and the wonderful thing is that I do think that, I hate to talk about this stuff because it feels like we're going to have downtime right after I talk about it, but we've had really fantastic uptime. So how we got there was through a series of steps. So the first most critical step, and I wish he could be here, and please let me know, I can connect you guys to him, but was finding Saravanan, who is a guy who lives in Sweden, and who he and I developed a great relationship. And I found him on the MySQL list. You guys might, some of you, be on it. But having a dedicated DBA be part of the team was one of the first steps, because if you expect that your average or strong PHP Perl developer is going to be able to do the type of query optimization and analysis that you need to survive heavy growth, I think it's an unfair expectation. It's kind of like asking the programmer to be the designer as well. And so Saravanan joined us, and the first step, of course, was to start setting up slaves. And then we learned a lot through the process of setting up slaves. So at first we thought, great, we'll set up 3 servers, and we'll use MySQL proxy, and through MySQL proxy we'll send all the write statements to the master and all the reads to the slaves, and we'll be fine. And that clearly wasn't going to actually pan out so easily. So instead, what we did is we really now if you look at our setup, and I highly recommend is that you look at it from sort of a business perspective and start seeing what are the different pressure points that you have. So for me and my own life personally, the moderators and the editors at HuffingtonPost were the quickest way to ruin my day, was to have them get stuck. And so the moderators had an intense SQL thing, because we built this complex comment system that has ridiculous amounts of moderation stuff and highlights the charged word, and it's a very intense thing that is also attributing points to users and etc. So the screen they load hits SQL pretty hard, and the fight, so SBM, seconds behind master, that became the whole thing for us, is like the fight to keep SBM at 0 as soon as you have the slaves. And that, it turned out that if we tried to treat this as just one application and enough slaves to support it, that wasn't going to work out, because when you looked at it, there were the different needs that we had. So we dedicated one slave to the editorial machines, which means that slave was the first one that it was like, we neurotically, damn it, that slave has to be 0 seconds behind master all day and week long. And in doing that, we started to realize the applications inside our site that were preventing us from getting to there. So critical to HuffingtonPost is we're extremely data driven, and we built our own internal stats that give editors tons of very relevant information. But it's a tremendous amount of data collecting, and so just the inserts and then passing those inserts through the slaves was really killing the rest of the applications. So when we realized, okay, well, stats is just like something that's impacting us really hard, and we have to have it on the master, then we immediately set up a stats slave. So the editorial slave could skip all of stats, and we just configured it so it's like, don't even replicate stats to the editorial slave, and also push all your queries that are stats related off to that stats server. We had to take it one step further, because every once in a while the org would ask me, like, oh, we need to know how many active users we've had in the last 6 months, or how many total this and that we have. And those things were totally possible, really important information, but they would just kill SQL when we tried to run them. They were enormous queries that you can't optimize. You needed them to be a huge query. So that, again, was solved by having a slow stats slave. So now you could have the stats that were normal and sort of every day and last 24 to 36 hours, and then you could have a stats slave that would go out to go do huge queries without any impact on production. So that separation was super useful. And then we had to figure out, I mean, in general, there was, as we got into election year, we were really still very understaffed and very under budget. Thank God we got $25 million of financing in December of 2008, but election year we were totally strapped for cash and everything. So we were really trying to be very creative about how we solve these things. And the number one thing I think is that working relationship between your DBA and your developers, and the coordination of it. So I'm not sure how much you guys want to get into like the type of query optimization, but one thing that I found interesting and surprising was that, for example, there'd be queries where you'd say, okay, well, we just need the first 25 entries of the last of blog posts, and so we do a limit 0.25 on the query, and that actually does a full table scan on everything, and so everywhere in code that we had naively thought a limit 0.25 would contain your query was untrue, and that type of thing, and fixing that is something that I think for us, luckily I had complete buy-in from the organization that for many months we were going to feature freeze and just improve code in order to survive election. So it was really useful for us to have that election peak that everyone was curious, what is it going to be like on election day and the day after, and are we going to live through it? I think it'd be harder to get the type of backing for doing the things we did if there wasn't some point that was freaking everyone else out in the foreseeable future. But that was really useful, and we were able to not feature freeze, but do a lot of things building up into election with just respect for that infrastructure would be number one, and that we would have to go in and optimize stuff. So a lot of work went into actually optimizing MT. It wasn't really ready for, we started with 3.1, and so for example, every table was MyISO, which is like a great way to just die. It's keep all your tables MyISO and you're lost. We do have some tables in MyISO, and we've done some interesting experimentations. I don't know how many of you guys are engine freaks, but there are cases where MyISO is spectacular. But in general, it's such a limited set of circumstances where MyISO is better, that you're just so much better off going off to MDB. So let me see where I am with this. So on that build up to election with the slaves, the other thing that was just so critical, and I can't recommend it enough, is that I don't think you can run high performance MySQL without Memcache or some equivalent in front of it. And it was totally amazing how much everything was tied together. So we had a horrible week in spring where there was some scripts that were just making PHP super slow, and that would make them kind of hang on the connection over to MySQL, and connections would stack up, and we would be lost in that direction. Getting our code base to work really well with Memcache, and then figuring out how to also handle the Memcache cluster better. So for example, with Memcache, we originally thought, okay, well, we have 14 front-end servers, let's put Memcache on each one, and now with this pool of 14. And then I think Jim could probably talk about these things a lot better than me, in particular with SSD and SAM. But we were lucky enough to get Jim to join us in December, January?
February.
Slightly
after the month.
I appreciate him even more than his actual time here. But one critical thing is that we brought Memcache down to, instead of 12, 14 machines spread across it, instead set to just 4 that were huge machines. And now basically you would have, because your Memcache misses go to your database. So anytime we have Memcache fail on us, it would hit the database. And we definitely don't believe in MySQL's query caching stuff very much. I don't know if anyone's had more success on that than we have, but we feel basically like query caching is irrelevant and you almost need to consciously avoid it. And Memcache is everything, and you need to make sure that every part of your application is logically using it. So anywhere that you can tolerate, that's the other piece of it, is that you have to be, the dirty realism part is that I don't think we would ever be able to have all our slaves at 0 SVM. So you have to figure out which parts of your app are okay if it's 25 seconds behind, or even if it's 3 minutes behind because it's being hit by its query. If you're looking at our 24-hour stats and that is 3 minutes behind, nobody's going to notice ever. So I think that's the piece where you sort of figure out what is the stuff where the SVM challenge is going to be a huge wall with very little return, and where is it going to be comparable and have huge impact, and looking at that. Also, there's places where you just have to brace yourself because that SVM lag is going to cause horrible bugs in your application. Anywhere you do an insert and then a select really quickly, either you've got to have that on an SVM 0 slave, like one that you really trust, or, and this is what you really probably need to do, is you've got to do that second select, the one right after the insert or the update on the master. And that, I guess it was implicit in this, but the first major thing after we added the slaves was figure out what the hell to get off the master. Because there's a ton of queries that you can set up to go off. So I think if Jim, I think you could talk about the SSD and the SAM situation we're in.
Along with my hiring came some money to improve the hardware. So one of the things Paul just described to you is how it evolved from a single read-write master to a cluster of it got up to 7 with 1 master and 6 read-only slaves. Microphone? Sorry. So the cluster Paul just described started out as the one read-write master, and then it grew to have 6 read-only slaves hanging off of that. And then the different types of queries would go to different of those 6. 2 of them were pulled together for the web front ends and pulled everything out. But that was an attempt to scale, like he said, during the election year when money was tight, and they were actually scaling out on Dell 1435s, little Wendy boxes with a RAID 1 of SATA drives. So I was lucky enough to be able to just put some heavy hardware in literally last week. I was at the colo this morning finishing some of the setup. So we have SSD storage as sort of varlib MySQL, the data dart, and then we have a Xiotech SAM mounted with some RAID 10 ones as just an external mount point, and then we have InnoDB configured to actually use the Xiotech SAM for the IB data and the log files. So I actually found some blog posts by XD, and the sort of rolling append of the log files occurs on the spindles that are better at the sequential I/O. So you can split those 2 up, and you can get thousands of IOPS out of both at the same time. Right now we're doing that with 5.0, but we are trying to upgrade to 5.1 as soon as possible. It's just any of you have tried it now, you run into random little, this query is going to crash it, or this query is going to suddenly be 100 times worse. So we're testing our way through those right now and getting to the point where we can start to actually take more advantage of this hardware. Because until you get into 5.1 or patch the daylights out of 5.0, MySQL in general and InnoDB in particular has trouble taking advantage of the level of hardware resources we just gave it. So that's the new hardware setup. It's currently only 4 servers, but I'm sure with new features we'll
be added to that.
We'll grow that again soon. You have a question? Dell. I think it's Samsung. Just whatever came with the servers.
Solid state, right?
Yeah.
How big is the database?
It's actually a surprisingly small database. The MyISM piece adds up to about 7 gig, and the InnoDB piece adds up to about 30 gig.
Why haven't you considered using MDB?
We have. My DBA is Saravanan, the guy you mentioned, is a big proponent of MySQL cluster. We just haven't gotten time to.
Well,
either the hardware or the architecture to try it out. It's like a fairly radical jump. You know, it would be even more QAing than the 5.0.
As far as I understand, your type of environment is mostly read, right? You can
No, because
usually
keep in mind, we've got Memcache in front, which is absorbing a lot of the read-only workload. So by the time things get back to MySQL, especially the write master, it's a much more heavy mix than the sort of mostly read-only approach that you think of as sort of publishing website.
You said there are 80,000 commands per day.
Yeah.
That roughly corresponds to like 10,000 inserts per hour, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that
If
huge.
that was the only thing that was being inserted.
Yeah, but
it's not that
master
massive.
being
But,
only for writes.
yeah. I think so. I think that the real MySQL cluster, whether it's memory or disk-based, is in our future. We asked a lot of people about their experiences with it, and it felt to us like that was going to be a harder goal to reach faster than going with the slave cluster and replication. Also, there were some horror stories that came out, and maybe they weren't fair. But the guys who gave us $25 million in December is Oak. They're an awesome VC company, and their tech guru is David Black. And he's been kind of advising us through these things. And when we looked at, he had some pretty hard stories about it. And basically, from his side, we're setting up the second data center right now. And the concern is, for example, if we were using Oracle, there'd be no doubt that we'd have the master-master replication on either side in a cluster base like that. But that MySQL, for our team size, if in particular, that level of cluster would be something that we'd reach down the line. Do you have a good experience with it? You love it?
Yeah.
What are you using it for?
I'm working for a telco company. It's slightly different.
bread and butter.
That was...
Yeah. But the volume-wise, if you compare it to web applications, we are making huge volume.
Yeah.
It's we are
Actually, telco companies was the example of where people are using it more than anywhere else. And I don't think you guys could use our setup. I think you'd die on our setup.
There are two approaches. In order to scale it out, yes, it's not that easy with the replications. Master slave, it's a linear application. In order to reduce that, what do you call it, slave latency?
The SVM second.
Yeah, you gotta consider using disposable slaves, which is like no InnoDB checks, no double buffer, no checksum, no nothing. If you lose that slave, that's fine.
Yeah.
But for redundancy purposes, you gotta have a spare or hot spare that's always up to the second, up to date. And I guess that server that you were talking about is that type of application.
Yeah, and sort of on that survival thing,
Yeah,
we looked at it and it was like, wow, we've got to make it through tomorrow.
They're not that good service for any database application.
Are you guys ready for QA?
We don't mind.
yeah.
We don't
Okay,
mind.
so we'll make it official. Let's make it an official QA, because I saw a few hands go up, and let's just grab out right there in the back. I see a hand.
As you've invested more in your production environment, it's gotten beefier on the hardware side. How have you tried to mimic that on the development side? As you're trying to write new stuff, optimize, but not against all the production servers.
Yeah, it's tricky because we're obviously production is number one, But for example, so we've tried to. My philosophy has been to try to make the developers live in a bubble that cannot harm production, right? So that bubble is EC2 for us. However, I don't know if someone has a great MySQL EC2 implementation, but it looks like a dead nightmare. Like you've got to go to Big Table if you're going to go to EC2. I mean, whatever their name is for it, I'm forgetting, but that logic. So we did, in order to, as things grew, we had to take our EC2 instance and create a slave and a database server at our cluster that would handle that, because it just would start to, the EC2 is, I don't know if it's gone higher, but it was capped at like 6 gigs of RAM or something
15.
ridiculous. It's now 15, and
Yeah.
still too low for what we're doing. But our developer instances are annoyingly slow. Like when it's not intolerably slow, but it certainly wouldn't be acceptable for production. And it's something we probably will work on a little more down the line. But one thing that's great is the team, the development team, I was going to talk a little bit more about how that grew because I'm really happy with what we've done and proud of it, which is it's a hybrid model where we have 5 of us in the office in Soho, and then we've got another 15 now that are remote developers. And so there's a team in Ukraine, there's a team in Chile, there's a guy in Brazil, there's a guy in India, the Survivalist in Sweden, and having an admin just focused on helping the developers made an enormous difference because Jim and Rick is our other internal sysadmin. Like they have to focus on production. So having someone that was pretty relatively cheap and also very talented to just support them from a sysadmin side was critical. And the other pieces of that DBA thing is that every alter is analyzed by Sadhavanan. And then he does the annoying thing of updating every developer instance too. Because it's very easy to start ending up with bugs in code when your developers all have different verge schemas.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's something that kind of surprised me when I got here, but we do probably anywhere between 2 and 4 alters on the live tables a week. There's just a constant, maybe even more. There's just a constant flow of tweaking the tables and improving the database structure and the query. The feedback loop between the developers and the database, the DBA, is incredibly tight.
We also do very fast launch cycles. So we probably do 5 take lives a day.
How many tables do you have total?
I would say somewhere between 30 and 70.
Not that much.
We use multiple databases.
Do you have one big?
Or is all?
It's almost entirely within one database for MySQL.
Well, yeah. I mean, we have there's certain things we've isolated out, like fundraise.HuffingtonPost was a viral project that it doesn't hit any of our core internals. It was an FEC mapping project, so that's on its own.
And also, pruning the replication to some slaves means that they don't actually have all the tables, even if they're the same database.
Right.
Yeah. You mentioned you're upgrading from 5.0 to 5.1. And that you're testing your code for slowness. Can you describe the process of how you sort of test and migrate, how you find these problems at all?
Yeah, go for it.
So basically we have spare hardware, we set up the new version on it, and the way our various, mostly the web front ends for our website, the main web server clusters, we'll pluck one out. Either out of the live traffic or just give it its own config and have it talk to that database, maybe for 10, 15 minutes, maybe for a couple hours, and then maybe we'll take it out of live traffic and just point our browser at it directly, and then we'll manually browse around, and then just see the results from the query log or our database class that one of our developers wrote gives really detailed metrics on how long any given query took and the order of the queries it ran them in and that kind of thing, and where each one started and stopped. So you can get a really good view, well, developers and DBAs can, of how it's performing. And then it's more bugs. The one that we're held up on right now actually crashes that MySQL instance. Like it'll just stop responding. Not the whole instance, the connection.
Have you looked at MySQL 5.4?
In the sense that, it's out as a beta, but...
One of the things that you're going to benefit a lot is that TC malloc issue. I'm not sure if you know that one.
When do you think it will be stable enough? Because the back to the survivalist thing, there's some things in 5.1 that I can't wait for. But I can wait,
you can
right?
Go ahead and deploy MySQL 5.1 and go ahead with the Google's TC malloc library, which is going to benefit concurrence up to 30%.
Yeah.
On our dual-core, quad-core CPU setup.
So we've played with that Google.
The Google patches, the browser patches, yeah.
It is not really a patch. It's just a module that you load right before MySQL. It's not a patch for MySQL in that sense.
So when we set up, Sadhavan will do a new version and work with Jim and set it up, and then he'll disappear for 3 days doing benchmarking tests. And basically, it kind of relates to something too, is that we learned how to warm our query caches as well, and that can be applied to testing as well. So I'm scared of 5.4. I'm scared of 5.1. You know, the idea of 5.4, I don't know, do you think we should be less scared of it?
It's probably not enough bad, too. A lot of the issues are basically seamless to changes from underneath to go to 5.4 with no change
Right.
in code.
Yeah, any of the storage engine code is about the
If
same.
5.1 works, 5.4 should.
Yeah, they're both
I
going
see
to
what
plug
you're
in.
saying.
Yeah, I mean, if it comes out of beta and, goes through a couple of rounds of, the initial...
What I would suggest is
And
to
follow
use
people.
MySQL 5.4 slaves in your setup.
Okay.
And UTC malloc, as I said, disposable slaves.
Right.
And even if you lose it, it's going to be fine. And their resilience is going to be staying same.
Is there anyone else who's got questions?
Actually interested, I guess, is the PHP and the application side.
Yeah.
What output cache do you
APC. Yeah.
have? Have you done any benchmarks or just,
Sort of. I had a monitoring system, Smoking, set up on a whole bunch of example URLs that go through different code paths for us. And the day we implemented APC, it was a massive drop off in how long the page took to load. The base page, not all the elements, obviously. It was like roughly 30%. It was a big win.
Yeah,
we've long since added enough features to unwin it, but that's the game.
Do you usually measure, keep those metrics in the production? Do you measure them? Like how many, and do you graph them? How do you keep the history? How do you monitor them?
So the biggest thing is cacti. I was just talking to Paul on the way over here about how it's kind of a love-hate because it's the only thing we got, and it does everything, and it's kind of all in one, but the 5-minute resolution is a real thorn in our side. But we use cacti graphs. We use the MySQL cacti templates that I think Baron Schwartz put on. From Kona, yeah.
And so Cacti, Nagios, and Smoking.
Right.
And without Cacti and Nagios, just give up. Like, you're just screwed. It was so bad before we had Cacti because we wonder, were things worse? And you've got to do some human memory thing about how bad things were 3 weeks ago. So whether it's an alternative to Cacti or not, being able to look at trends over time. The other thing is from a development standpoint, we love Track. We're fully integrated with SDN and our ticket system, and the ability to go back and say, look at this trend goes bad then, and look at the tickets that were related, and that a developer can pass a ticket over and you see exactly what code related to that feature.
Yeah, Track's got that timeline feature. So one of the things I do a decent amount of time is spot the change in the cacti graph, go look in the Track timeline, find the release, go plug that in.
I saw a hand go up in the back over there. Yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, since you guys have a lot of rapidly developing content or stories that are in progress, for instance, when you were covering the Iran protests,
Right.
how do you guys have do you have automatic reading of the cache for updates to that content in any way? Or how do you handle that?
I was following that particular blog post a lot, so I got picky and I lowered the cache time on it in Akamai for myself. And so, yeah.
But it's worth. We didn't talk about the caching layers in completion. Akamai sits in front of everything we do. I mean, not literally everything, but almost everything. So there's different cache rules for news entries and for blog and et cetera. And I think we have some really cool things coming towards that. I think that the Iran thing for us was it was a super important moment, I think, and we're building tools based on that still.
Questions?
Do you expect significant changes in your software architecture in 2 to 3 years, let's say?
I expect it in the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're really rapidly changing, so I don't. I'm not interested in moving platforms. Not going to get into holy wars of PHP or Perl winning. We have a hybrid of the two. We're not going to go Java or something crazy like that. So, sorry.
On that note, actually, I'd like by show of hands, who here is using the exact same technology 3 years ago without upgrading or anything still today in any project you're doing? One person. So I guess that answers the question. Two people.
We're pretty close.
Okay. Well, a very small minimal. So I guess that answers the question that in 2 to 3 years you can be pretty sure it's not going to be exactly what you got now. Yes?
What about moving away from movable type?
Not interested because
At this point, we're about 2 years into a
it's our own CMS.
parallel, if not fork.
Right. We don't wait for movable types upgrades. We're not really following those. Those guys wrote an awesome core piece. Thank God I didn't inherit Vignette or something like that. Then we'd have a significant change coming soon. But it always was, even though now it's officially open source, it always was open source in that the source was there. Nothing was encrypted. You could go and solve your own problems. So we've ripped out all the pieces that didn't work for us. And it's our own CMS in a way that I think they set up a good piece for us, too. It's like write out, it has good core logic of you're going to write a news entry, then write out all the HTML and leave that as HTML, and only stuff that has to be dynamic should be dynamic. And Perl is really good at doing the stuff they ask Perl to do, and then PHP plugs in where it's appropriate. So,
we have sort of Perl pre-creating the files, and then a lot of those files are PHP files, so PHP doing the dynamic execution part. So that's sort of the front-end, back-end split of the languages.
When did the life cycle of HuffingtonPost start working with Akamai and that technology?
Oh, that was set from the beginning. And that was how HuffingtonPost survived the horror time, right? Because even though my day was really bad, most readers didn't even notice, right? Because the things that would happen to us is moderators could get behind and get slow. Editors would get slow at their jobs, so the front page would maybe be more stale. It'd be a loss of opportunity in that sense that the editors were no longer efficient. But we've always written everything so that the origin could go dark, and the 90% of users would still have good pages to get to served through Akamai.
And you're using, obviously, H Suite, not just regular static CDN, right? Because when people say Akamai, they're like...
Sorry,
we must be talking about static at this point.
No,
go ahead.
No, he's especially curious.
So basically, when people say word Akamai, there are two meanings to that.
True.
One
There's
is
like
about
25
static stuff, right? But primary for businesses like ours, like the static content, like static files, and there is a caching dynamic content.
Exactly.
On the edge. Right?
Yes.
So you're talking about, you started with the edge right from the beginning? Or?
We have always had triple-dub resolved to Akamai, and then they look to us for origin when caching rules say. So that means that we can have very little, like, I can't off the front page use PHP to detect your browser. Right? We have to do that through Akamai or JS or rules like that. So any personalization has to be JS and Ajax and et cetera.
Or dedicated servers, maybe?
But come on, you got to talk. You're having such an emotional response to this thing.
I'm just thinking you're very lucky. Put it that way.
Oh, because you don't get to. Everything is dynamic in what you're doing.
Everything is dynamic.
Sorry, where do you guys work?
Interactive One, it's Black Planet and a couple other sites at this point.
Okay.
But the MySQL ones are the newer content vertical sites, and they're based off of WordPress.
Mm-hmm.
But we're still completely dynamic, running the whole time.
If Origin dies, you die.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
If Origin dead, we're dead. We're not a static content. you're too dynamic. So I'm very curious later on to talk to you. Because
Really? You can't even be 15 seconds behind?
So
like I said, I'm kind of curious. We haven't
Because
our main site,
if you
not
think
at all.
caching has to be, that's one thing that was a little bit of a revelation over the last couple of years for me, is that if you think caching has to be, oh, this is static for months.
No.
yeah,
Can you have 30 seconds of
Our main
cache
site
so that
is Black Planet.
all the incoming for 30 seconds goes to
Our main
one?
site is Black Planet, and it is a social network.
Oh, your eye is asleep.
So where I work, I work for the guys you don't like, a managed services provider, and one of our
We love ours.
and one of our referenceable customers that I work on all the time is Condé Nast Publications.
Sure. Right.
And if our origin dies, we're fine too.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not a.
IP soft, by the way, or
What do you mean?
your MSP?
Oh, Savas.
Savas, okay.
Um,
I used to work for a sister company then, so I'm lightly familiar with their infrastructure.
so.
Yeah, I was at it.
Actually, you're not anymore because it was completely changed when it was migrated to us.
They do that every 2 or 3 years. Yeah, no, we've been really, really lucky to be able to use Akamai as much as we have. It takes a lot of the load off the front. It's this great safety net of, Origin can be dark and the homepage is up. And it's not going to get the comments, it's not going to get the updates, it's not going to, but we have a breathing room of moments to solve the problem.
Have you guys looked at Apache caching or mod proxy, that type of stuff?
We can homegrow it. It's just really handy for them to
It
do.
also provides you another safety net for even if your origin goes down, it's going to provide you a couple more minutes. If Akamai cache expires and such.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
What distros are you running, and how deeply are you customizing your operating systems for different roles?
It's CentOS pretty much across the board. I think maybe 1 or 2 of the EC2 images are.
Do you mean on MySQL or on our?
Any?
Yeah, the web machines and the MySQLs are all CentOS. There's a couple 4s left over, but I'm slowly redeploying everything as 5.3. I got what's going so that I can, keep things somewhat consistent.
Are you using Puppet to manage computers?
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm just getting, I'm working my way up the sort of through the life cycle.
Okay.
I started with builds.
What are you using for builds?
Kava. So it's a suite around Kickstarter for anyone who's not familiar.
Yeah. Very helpful.
Mike DeHaan or something like
Yeah,
that.
Mike
Very,
DeHaan.
very handy
Michael
guy.
DeHaan.
Helpful guy.
Yeah. Question?
And by the way, the MySQL build is something we internally fight about a lot. What's our next one going to be? Son of an M would like to customize the hell out of it. On one side of the ring, Jim would like to not as much on the other side of the ring, and then some of us are in between. But it's definitely tough figuring that out.
By customized, you're talking about like custom compiles?
Custom compiles.
Percona or Delta, possibly.
I'm working on it.
It's a nice middle line in terms of the systems folks can just download it. The DBAs get the patches they want, by the way. Having the Subsecond slow logs.
Right.
Oh my God,
Slow patch,
really
right.
helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Although there's I don't know if you guys saw this, the Mockit toolkit or whatever, I never pronounced it right. The query analyzer can work off a TCP dump now.
Oh,
So
nice.
you can do a span port, or you can TCP dump, and then you can do your analyzation. You don't even need the microsecond query log for it. It's slightly different and very new. So
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, our DBA has been disappointed with just Percona and done. That story doesn't work for him. And when we fight about whether it does work or not, but he tends to be right in a way that takes us a long time to agree with on those types of issues. Yeah.
Just curious if you scrub the logs or some scripts, or just offer them.
not really. I mean,
For like monitoring like error logs, MySQL logs, somehow aggregating them, doing alerts.
I think there's some config settings that basically truncate some of them in 5 days. A lot of the rest, we had pretty big drives on the old database machines, so it wasn't really a pressing issue.
Philosophically,
So you're not using like Splunk or anything to go analyze.
But philosophically, old error logs are totally uninteresting to us, and I just tell them delete them whenever we get there. It's like if you keep up with the recent error logs, you're lucky. No one in our has ever made it to. Let's see what happened last February. You know, so that stuff just gets cleaned out as quickly as.
I mean, like scrubbing, for example, we had like a peak and there were some errors going out in PHP error log, unexpected condition. How would you know?
Oh, so as it relates to the DB, one thing that I love is that our lead guy in Ukraine wrote a custom DB class that is super light, very efficient, and gives us a ton of debugging information. So we don't have an error that's out there for a long time. We're immediately notified if there's something going on and address it right away. And I think it's helpful to send those, as annoying as it is, it's helpful to send them right to the inbox.
Yeah, our Splunk is effectively Google Apps.
Yeah, and you just suddenly, what the fuck's going wrong? Why is there so many emails about this thing, you know? And if Memcache has a similar sort of thing, if Memcache is expiring out too quickly or failing, etc. And I think that everyone in our organization is good at, if I tell them, guys, sorry, that feature's a few days delayed, like we've got something going on, and we just all hands on deck and figure that out.
Yeah, we cannot try the email, except I think it killed our server, mail server company.
That's the nice thing about Google being a mail service.
And then some people started wondering like, why they get like 20,000 emails from us.
I know, and that makes it not a great solution if you're going to have a lot of, you know, basically, it also becomes clumsy because even with Google hosted apps, you know, you get emails. If something goes wrong at 2 a.m., I'm still getting emails by 5 p.m.
We're familiar with the sort of rate limiting curve they have.
It takes a while for all 20,000 to appear.
Google actually has pretty good PHP IMAP connections, so you can write a custom app for the PHP to go in and manipulate your emails. Stuff like that.
Just send it that way rather than through their mail relays?
Well, it's still into Google, but then you can manipulate it once it's on Google.
Oh.
So you can anything you do in the deep web browser, you can write a custom PHP app. It's called Books for all that stuff.
You mentioned obviously that Memcache was a good move for you, right? And that you sharded you not only sharded but separated by feature, right? Like databases. Did you look into refactoring the application to have more static content versus dynamic? I know that you use mobile type, but still, do you look in general into refactoring the software to match the update cycle more than relying on the database for dynamic?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but any time a feature is going to suck because of a sysadmin perspective, something's wrong. So, however, any time a developer has code out there that has no caching logic at all, something's also wrong. It can't be true. You have to be able to cache it. Whether it's the SQL query you're caching, even if it's a 5-second rule. If you're going to get inundated with requests every, like, 100 requests a second, and you turn that into one every 5 seconds, it's huge. So, so that logic is critical, and we have a code review process where I guess I've kind of encouraged. I don't know if this is fair or not. That dirty realism piece, it's okay for us to kind of fight with each other on tech team a little bit. I don't think it turns into actual fights, but it allows code review to be a part of the process where it's like Nike, who's the lead in Team Ukraine, can get kind of mad at someone for code and be like, dude, you can't do this, you're going to kill us if you're doing this thing, and explain. And I think that openness of that process, where as you're learning in developing code, that caching is something you're always looking at, and exposure to it. There's got to be a way to put Memcache in front of almost everything you do.
A lot of our, real quick, a lot of our custom tools on the back end, on the editorial stuff, because Movable Type was already set up that way, even though they don't necessarily use its code base, pre-write out flat files that we then rsync off to the front-end web servers. So a lot of things that
yeah, like so if
are
someone
flat file hits instead of database hits.
So if an editor is going to write a new news entry, right, the headline and the body and the photo, that's chosen one time. There's no reason to every time that thing is requested to do anything dynamic. That's a pre-assembled HTML inside a PHP file so that there's little pieces that, for example, comments have to be dynamic. So that's an include off of there. And I think that just making sure that everything you can pre-write out to HTML, you do, but if you can't write it out to HTML directly, you also Memcache. And you can even write HTML to Memcache as well, which we also do.
Yeah, probably movable type by itself answers part of this question because
It's
it is already
good
architecturally.
Right. You have that sort of on-save event to catch and do with.
Yeah.
Yes. If you guys lose a Memcache server, do you guys poison your entire cache?
That was actually the problem when we had it spread across 14. What would happen is Apache would eat up enough memory that Memcache would lose, and it would either get killed or the machine would start swapping, and then other servers would time out talking to it, and then they would all rehash a little differently depending on who was talking to who when across the 14, and we'd wind up with a rapidly devolving Memcache hit rate. That was the prime mover behind getting everything down to 4 reliable Memcache servers that have not hiccuped yet.
What would happen if one of us do hiccup?
The current library config is the default, so they'll rehash. So it's kind of effectively a wipe. As we're rebuilding our new web front-end servers, just built today, they are getting the algorithm to be the fixed one. I don't remember the exact command, but consistent hashing. Thank you. So it'll just be a 25% hit, and the database will just have to work a little more.
How do you guys handle session data?
Definitely not through PHP, right? Because you never know which server. I don't ever want us to be in a situation where you have to be on the same server you just were at. So through cookies and JavaScript primarily, and that gets you a really long way.
So you're not actually storing like session data like in Memcache or some other.
There will be session-related data that will go into Memcache. That would just help, so that you don't have to query back for that type of thing.
Like PHP session facilities.
No, because then that would just totally ruin the whole logic of Akamai and many front ends. And we're trying to get our second data center set up, and that will even further complicate. So for me, that has a fairly simple answer that has to be done in code to avoid, at least in I wouldn't prescribe that across the board, but in our situation, that's kind of was there from the beginning and works pretty well.
On that note, how do you deal with mobile? Because support JavaScript, support cookies, all that.
Yeah, so we have our first, on mobile we have the iPhone app.
Everybody with an iPhone, go grab it.
Yeah. The iPhone app's been a lot of fun. It's growing like mad, and Apple's including us in the Apple Store promos now. But the BlackBerry app is the other mobile, thing that is actually consuming data. We have an Android app we're about to release, but we're going to have to buy another product from Akamai to do that elegantly. There's a couple things that we can't do without this. It's not going to be that much extra cost for it, but we can't detect elegantly what your browser is. Like some of the future things we'd like to do is that 25% of our audience still uses IE6.
Ours is higher.
Wow. If we could all collectively kill IE6 together.
You can start with your own IT. I started, and they're upgrading to IE7 in weeks.
Oh, you mean get your own staff out of there? Yeah, none of the HuffPost staff is on IE.
No, my point, if you work for enterprise,
please get them out of there.
Give them any reason why they should be upgrading to IE7, you will do your share.
Or Chrome. Because we've got mighty business apps that just don't work.
Oh, God.
Then, yeah.
I think
your bed is
double click is still
you
can't
shouldn't
be used without IE.
Then it's not only IT that you need to.
So, but what the reality of what to do with IE6, in my perspective, is to build a ridiculously simple version of our site. That's already done with our BlackBerry app, so we can kind of tweak that, spend a few weeks, and then detect IE6 and send them there, because it's hopeless going around in IE6. So that's things that we can't do right now that we're actually about on Wednesday.
Oh, cool.
Just to follow up on the session, how do you deal with the server-side cache stuff, like user profile, login information? And it's stuff you wouldn't want to store in.
Right. A lot of that is uncached via Akamai, or has really low caches, or that's the least Akamai handled piece of it. Hence us to JavaScript. And almost all of that's in Memcache. The developer, Mikey, again, particularly on that.
Right, so you're kind of implementing your own similar thing to session.
Yeah. Yeah, we have that basically custom, so that Memcache ends up being a storage place for that. And then with the right Memcache key, et cetera, you can access that. And it's been that has gone really well.
Did you think of rewriting a piece of PHP that handles session to just use Memcache?
You don't have to rewrite it. If you install a backup extension, it will give you that directly.
Well, there is
Directly storing session data.
We didn't have that legacy issue of wanting to do that.
Yeah, right. Yes, you say your stats stuff is separate from your main servers?
A little bit, but yeah.
How do you guys sync the data between the
So everything flows into the master, right? And from the master, then we have, we just changed. We used to have seven slaves.
We're like 5 now.
And then we would just set up rules. So we'd say, okay, there's 2 servers that are going to have everything. And one server is particularly our, if our master dies server, that we keep optimized. Because the other thing that's tricky about it is that there's tons of tunings that you do to the slaves that you don't do to the master. And you get kind of deep in there, and then you realize, oh, damn, if we lose that master, we don't actually have a replica of it. We have a replica of all the data, and et cetera, but it's not actually tuned. So we use one that we have sort of tuned as a master to be ready any moment. Thank God, with all our monitoring and all our work, we don't have our master go down. We were pretty much able to. The other thing, by the way, that was kind of survivalist that helped us a lot is that we spent time before election building a site config thing. So basically, I was trying to, especially we were so understaffed, I wanted to be able to drive a sinking ship. You know what I mean? And like make quick decisions that would like, oh shit. So I used to actually, we had an Etsy host set up for every server, and so I would SSH into the editorial server and change it because I saw that the slave it was pointing to was on like 400 seconds SVM. So I just log in and change it to the other one, and the moderators would stop complaining. And in our site config, we developed programs where I could turn little features off, and depending on how bad the day was or how worried I was. So for example, we have ClickMeter is a really awesome tool for the editors. They know on their front page how many people are clicking anywhere on the page and how it compares to the hour before, and is it going up or down. We can lose that, and I've got 2 hours before people start bitching about it being gone. So that type of thing, I had a whole set of things where you basically, it's almost, in my mind, it was a lot like a boat where you can lock up the chamber, and that whole area is flooded for a while, and you just have to deal with that. But it keeps it from the whole thing went down, which when you're in survivalist mode, we luckily don't use that very often.
Yeah, like a lot of our Ajax refresh stuff on the front end, you probably, if you load the website and just leave it there, it'll refresh on its own for a while, or I guess indefinitely.
Yeah.
But we can disable that, and that'll sort of instantly shed a decent percentage of load of people who just either left their browser open or, someone leaves their browser open long enough to do 2 refreshes. If it doesn't happen, then I saved 33 or 66% on that user.
And the most drastic one of those switches would be turn comments off. Mm-hmm. And then that static HTML then says, sorry, comments are in maintenance. And 90% of the traffic flows fine, and you get a lot of people complaining about comments being down, but it's not, the whole site is dead. type of media thing.
Is it all manual, or do you have some automated process that would turn out some features depending on the law?
So this we've evolved. It used to be totally like me making. I was the human load balancer, and I would just like look at. I was obsessed, and I would like have SSH screens and everywhere, and that evolved into a couple things that were really useful. One is that Rick, who I would love to have been here, he's been a huge part of all of this, built a health check page that was kind of like a dashboard that would kit all the things. So I can quickly see every front end. If its load is above 3, the line goes yellow. If it goes above 8, the line goes red. If on the SQL cluster, SBM is there, 0, 0, 0, and if it goes over 20, it goes yellow, and over 50, red, and things like that. So this health check, it used to be like, the guys would all make fun of me because that's all. I was just health check, and then human load balancing. And since then, we now have, you can talk about the VIPs and the...
Right, we had, our old load balancer was your kind of basic dumb layer 4 load balancer, and it would lump things onto any given machine, and then it would get near that swapping point, and the load would skyrocket. And then, because it was an MSP environment, we didn't have direct access to the load balancer. We actually sort of had to wait for the machine to effectively go down before it would get taken out of the load balancer. So it was kind of a daisy chain of machines keeling over. I don't want to trash too many brands on camera. So we went out and spec'd a couple of load balancer companies. We went up there with a new guy, A10 Networks, and we put it in, and it's load balancing dramatically more evenly across because we're using per connection.
And that's on 2 levels. One of the front ends in PHP, but the other is now we have VIPs for the SQL. So where it used to be one dedicated slave for editorial, that's now a group, and now it can optimize automatically between that. I mean, editorial just gets 2, but TripleDove has more, and et cetera. So that's a hell of a lot better than being a human load balancer. But it got me through that crazy time.
We got time for like one more question.
I'm just curious how big your team is now from where you were, 2 or 3 people.
I'm really bad at keeping track of these numbers, but we, as CTO, I also run product development, so it gets a little bit confusing from that. But we're 5 of us in the office, right?
That's about right.
And actually, I think we're 7 in the office now with Travis. So that's grown now to 7 in the office. There's 1 table of us there. And then...
what are your roles?
What's that?
What are the roles of each of the 7?
So Jim and Rick keep the servers alive as sysadmin and let us know when and da-da-da-da-da. Rick is the most jack of all trades of us all. He understands the code base to the sysadmin thing more than anyone else on the team, so he's a critical collaborator there. Ben is a brilliant young guy who develops features, and so he and Sandeep are the 2 primary developers that focus on the core stuff, and then basically we have, in the Ukraine, we have 2 teams in Kharkov. And I don't, by the way, I don't know, should I get into the whole outsourcing thing? I don't believe in working with a company and then that company just shuffles people on you. That is not tolerable. But we really love the situation we're in, where we have now 8 people in one company, and we have a lead guy there who's just so fantastic. And I think we're in a very lucky, so the relationship I try to create with all the developers in the outside is a monthly retainer concept, which I think for them is a huge relief because they're used to per project specs where people say build MySpace in 3 weeks and it's unfair, and we really let them take the vacation time that is normal, and they don't think they normally get that type of opportunity. And they love having their stuff in high traffic and everything. but we also, and I send them, they are part of the team. It's not like, oh, and they're in the outsourced thing. They are as much a part of making HuffingtonPost better. Also on an idea level, one weakness that I have in the way I've organized this is there is no project manager, and Jim heckles me for that frequently. But basically, I think it's allowed us to have no task zombies, right? There's just like, there's probably 2 guys on the team that they pretty much do what you ask them. Yeah. But everyone else on the team knows that this is a creative thing. It's exciting, and don't be brain dead. I'm giving you, here's what the feature is like, but then they think about it on the way, and they'll email and say, hey, Paul, I thought about this. Like, what if we have this, and et cetera. So anyway, it's 8 guys in Kharkov, and that flows up under Nike. And then as people, as for example, Sergey and Konstantin have become so familiar with our environment, they have been given take live rights and code review rights. And so that kind of flows up as you've gained experience. We've got another 2 guys who work together in Kharkov that are in a different company. And then another 2 guys in Odessa and another 2 guys in Chile. And the time zone thing is awesome. It's just, I mean, I have 2 kids, they're both little, and so I'm up in the morning anyway. And that overlap with the 7 a.m. thing and the team in Ukraine until about 11 a.m., it's hard to find me. Because then, you know, I come in around noon and there's all this shit to show the editors. And sorry again. And we get feedback from the editors, they come up with ideas, and then before I go to sleep, I've got an email back to them of what to do. And it's this crazy fast cycle that we're under.
How'd you find your developers in the US?
It's a sort of sick passion of mine. It's not fast or easy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like, yeah, totally. Well, finding developers not fast.
Yeah. And I think it goes back. I was born in Mexico City. My mom's Mexican. My wife's Bulgarian. And I think that I always wanted an international job, you know? And so, and HuffPost is very American, you know, in a coverage and audience and everything. But I think it's always sort of sat well with me, that concept. And so I think the key is to start developing relationships. And then I have a very optimized system of meeting the person. We do everything through Skype chat. No, nobody needs to go to voice. You know, it just makes everyone uncomfortable anyway. You just chat, and then I give them a small project. If they seem good in chatting, they seem like, hey, they get it, then I figure out something that is 1 week of work. It would take any of my guys 3 hours to do. That's a perfect project. So it's 1 week to get, what the hell is this, and try to get through the install and ask the right questions. If they make it through that week, I extend that to a month. And if in the second week it's going terribly, I pay them for the month. So I'm not trying to rip anyone off. I'm just trying to, and they get paid for these trials. So if the week goes horribly, they get paid for that week. And then, so if you make it past 1 month, usually you're going to be on the team for a while. Often they've been superstarred. Look at that, crazy, they got into it. So I just want to lock them up and get them in a monthly retainer so that they can stay with us and know that they have a future that's guaranteed.
Excellent. Thank you guys for coming. I want to do a special thanks to our sponsor, the IT Management Conference, and the Do Concierge. Tiffany, if you'd like to come up, we have a raffle now. You guys can win something. Tell them about it.
Hi everyone. I feel like most of you basically caught the gist of coming in, so I'll just give you a little brief introduction to the company. They do concierge, a personal concierge service that allows you to increase productivity, especially for you all who actually own your companies or lead your companies. It helps a lot of your employees be able to increase their productivity by outsourcing daily tasks and things that would otherwise divert them from making you more successful. So we are filling off 2 free hours of this service. So I'm just going to...
Ooh, let someone else pick it out.
Oh, right.
let's pick.
There you go.
Mine is orange.
All right, the guy with the bad handwriting whose name starts
Oh,
with the word Greg.
Greg.
I think that might be me.
All right.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Okay, we got the post crew here. They're going to stick around if you guys
I'm just
want to
gonna
ask
show you
them
an
questions
email.
in private after.
Let me give